smart shoppers! It's now the start of Beetlegust 2025. And I do realize it's unlucky to open an umbrella inside, but we'll just see how this project goes and then we'll know whether that's true or not. This year's project is going to be the Saturn scene or the sandworm scene. There's a lot of sand, there's sandworms, there's some rocks, and a door. It sounds like there's not much to do, but actually there's quite a bit I need to work out. So this video is going to be a planning video where I start to gather some supplies and do a test run of my very specific idea. I don't actually know if it will work, but we'll test it out. So I really hope you enjoy this year's Beetlegust. Let's go ahead and get started prepping the base. This is going to be the first time that I'm using the actual wood walls of the base for the walls of the scene. Previously, I have always covered them up, so now I need to prep them for paint because they very much look like plywood walls. I'm using some lightweight spackling and an old library card to smooth the spackling over the wood grain. I'm doing this in all directions, trying to smooth out the surface. It's going to take a little bit of time and a couple layers, but eventually I am happy with the surface prep. Once the spackling has dried thoroughly, I'm going to sand it and make sure that I get it as smooth as possible. I'm noticing that there's still some areas that very much look like wood grain, but it's a little bit hard to see because it's white spackling going onto a white surface. To help me see what parts of the wall still need a little bit more attention, I'm going to go ahead and do a base coat of blue paint. This is going to be a blue sky wall, and I'm going to need several layers of blue paint anyway, so this is just progressing me towards the finish line and helping me see the problem spots. And boy, did I find some problem spots. So I don't know if it was because of the glue that my friend who built the base for me used, but the paint was not sticking well to the corner areas where the wood panels come together. I wouldn't have spotted this on any of the other sections because I didn't use the walls as a background, so this is a great time to solve that problem. I did some extra sanding over the problem areas, so the next time I add paint, it sticks really well. I was also able to finish up the spackling and hide any remaining wood grain. Now I can do a final coat of blue paint, and it's not going to be the best coat of blue paint, and you will see why. I am going to be doing a practice paint job of these skies. So I will show you the reference in the Saturn scene in the original Beetlejuice movie. There are some fast moving clouds on Saturn. I don't know if this is supposed to represent the rings of Saturn moving quickly, or if this was just an artistic choice for some weather or some kind of movement in the background. So I'm trying to get the look of some fast moving clouds. I have never painted an exterior scene like this, so doing a practice run is very, very helpful. I'm also going to paint in a very short horizon line on where I think the sand dunes for this scene are going to hit against the wall. I really just want to get a sense of the space and an idea of what it might look like when it's done. I also cut out some of the red rock formations from construction paper. This is helping me decide, am I going to paint some in the background on the wall? Am I going to build some up against the wall? Or are they all going to be in the center of the room? I really had no idea how I was going to do this going in. It might seem a little weird to you that I am doing all this like pre-painting and it's not the final painting, and it seems like a lot of extra work before I actually do the final work. But this is a rather complicated space because it's an exterior space that I'm having to do inside of walls. And at first I was wanting to make it look rather realistic, so you look in there and you're just like, wow, this looks like an outside space. But I don't know if I have the skills to do that. However, I did think it would be fun to make it look just kind of like a sound stage with painted walls, which I'm sure it was, a sound stage with painted walls. or green screen. I'm not quite sure how they did that scene. But painting it out has really helped me kind of come to that conclusion. And it's also going to help in the fact that I have an idea for making a hallway scene inside of the door. I know there are a few of you who have never seen Beetlejuice who are watching these videos. So the door is significant because Barbara and Adam, who are ghosts, cannot leave their house. If they do leave the premises of their house, they're immediately dumped onto Saturn, or what they say is Saturn. It's this scene with yellow sand and some red rock formations, and if they're there for too long, these sandworms show up and try to eat them. I guess it's some encouragement to stay inside of your haunted house. So that's why there's a door floating in the middle of this scenery. So I thought it would be fun to try to create a hallway inside of the door. This may be a little bit complicated, but I wanted to try to make it look like the door is floating and that there's nothing behind it. This is a trick that I saw that was done by Disney. I saw a video of it. I have not seen it in person, but I saw a video of, it's like a Monsters, Inc. ride, I think. The movie Monsters, Inc. has a bunch of doors that lead to other places, kind of like a portal. So they have this scene set up where as the rider on the ride goes past the door, it looks like a flat door, but then there is a room inside of the door. And even if it doesn't look absolutely 100% perfect, I think it would be a fun addition to the space to have something inside of the door, just to add a little bit more detail and context. So that links back to why I am painting everything right now, at least a practice paint job, so that I can do a mock-up of what I want to do with the door, and I can actually test out to see if this idea will work. I'm going to do my test run for the floating door hallway out of cardboard. Cardboard is a really versatile material, and if you're doing a mock-up and you don't need it later, you can use it in another project or recycle the material. So it's a great way to do a test run on something you're not sure about. Now the door itself is just going to be the door frame and the door panel, so I have to hide an entire hallway behind this one piece. At this moment, I'm trying to test out where I want it to sit in the scene. I need room for the rock formations. I need room for the sandworms. So the door is really only going to stick out about 3 inches from the back wall. I used a scrap piece of cardboard to measure how thick the wall piece is in the back, and it's wider than my door, so I'm going to have some angled mirrored walls on either side behind my floating door. So here are my practice walls going together. As you can see, it gets thinner towards the front near the door frame, and then it gets thicker towards the back wall. And I think this shape room is going to be the perfect way to do this so that it completely covers the back panel. So I'm going to add some cardboard into the bottom and the top of this space, and now I have my completed fake hallway. Now, to cover up the outside of the room itself and hide it from the viewer, I'm going to be using this mirror paper. Now, I hate to waste mirror paper, and I did have some patrons, as we were talking about this, suggest that I could probably remove it and use it in another project, so I may try to do that. But because I will probably use a real mirror if this does work, I would rather test everything out on a cheaper form of mirror, which mirror paper is rather cheap compared to an actual mirror, and make sure that this works before I actually go all in. And I did just give myself a cardboard cut on my finger, so be careful when you're working with cardboard, it can be sharp. I covered both sides and the top of the room, making sure that you can still see the sides of the door frame. I did not add any mirror to the bottom. I just don't think it's necessary. I don't think the viewer will be able to see the bottom of the door very well. I removed the protective cover on the mirror paper and then turned my lights up fairly bright. I think lighting is going to have a lot to do with whether this works or not. I'm adding my 1, 2, 3 block in place to hold my hallway up. Later it will be permanently attached to the back wall, so it actually does float. And immediately I am pretty excited with how this is looking. You can see why I needed to create my rock formations and my horizon line with the sand, because I needed to see how much it would actually affect the mirror. So if I keep my sand horizon below the mirror, I think this works really well because it's just reflecting the sky walls. And because of the angle, I'm not seeing any of the rock formations in the mirror. So I'm pretty happy with this. I did add a little chair on the inside so you can see that it's a 3D space inside of what will hopefully look like a flat door. Now that I have proof of concept and I know that this mirror idea is going to work, I'm going to go back and really focus on painting the walls. When I started this video, I didn't know that I was going to do anything that's going to be a final feature in the room, but it seems like a really good time to do this because before I can do anything else, these walls need to be painted. And my first little swipes of white paint, I don't think are going to cut it. So let's create the skies of Saturn, or the Beetlejuice movie's interpretation of the skies of Saturn. First things first, I'm going to have to remove all of my little paper details and then do a new base coat over the walls. Thankfully, I don't have to do any of the wall prep anymore because that is all done, and I don't have to fully cover my previous clouds because I'm going to essentially be painting the same thing, but hopefully with a little bit more attention to detail. I am also going to cover up my horizon line where I painted in the sand because I don't want to be hindered by that. If I want to make a dip in the sand, I don't want there to be a yellow wall showing through. So I'm covering that back up, and I did decide to use my base as kind of my palette because I'm going to try painting the clouds with a paper towel instead of with a brush because I just didn't like all of the brush strokes. I think it does come out looking somewhat similar. I don't really think it was that much of an improvement using the paper towel, but it was another technique to try. Unlike last time, I'm also going to be going back and forth with some of the blue paint. This is going to cover up some areas that I didn't like how it came out, and it's just going to blend the clouds more into the background. So once I had my initial streaks, hopefully what looks like movement streaks, I'm adding in some more dabs to make what would be a defined cloud. And I don't know if cloud is the right term for Saturn. Maybe it's just a bunch of gas that's going by quickly. I'm not quite sure, but I'm going with cloud. Once I had all of my cloud formations done, I went back with a brush and made like a, I guess I would call it like a flat line. You know how sometimes clouds have like a flat bottom and then they're all voluminous on top? I am making a flat line on all of the clouds. And then I realized we were going a little bit too far into Toy Story territory. And when I looked back in the movie clips, I realized that the clouds were much more subdued. They weren't bright white. Everything was still bluish. It had a bluish hue even over the clouds. So I watered down some blue paint, and I'm using a sponge brush to sponge the blue paint over all of the clouds I just painted. This is a little bit nerve-wracking to do something like this over something you just spent quite a bit of time on, but I think it worked really well, and it pushes the clouds back a little bit further so they don't feel as like a major character in this scene, because they're just supposed to be background scenery. They're not the main event. So now I need to let all of this watery paint dry. When I went back to watch the Saturn scene again, I realized there are moons in the sky that I need to paint, so it's not going to be as simple as some clouds. In the movie, you can only see 2 moons. However, I thought it'd be cool to make 3. I always like doing things in odd numbers if possible. So I went online to look up how many moons does Saturn have, because I didn't want to paint 3 moons if there's only 2 moons. As of March 11th, 2025, it has confirmed that Saturn has 274 moons. So I think it'll be okay if I just paint 3. And I don't know which moons I'm painting. I think one of its most famous moons is Titan. I'm just going to paint the big green moon that we see in the reference, and then just a couple other ones that look like a generic moon. So here we go. I'm using some different sized circle templates to decide which sizes I want my moon to be. Now in the reference, the green moon is rather large, so I wanted to get that intimidating large moon feeling, at least on one side. And then I think I'm going to do 2 smaller moons on the other side. About halfway through this whole painting process, I thought maybe I should have just printed off pictures of Saturn's moons and glued them onto the wall instead of just taking all of this time to hand paint these moons. But I think it was worth it in the end. I added my mirrored hallway back in place to make sure that you can't see the reflection of the moon I'm tracing now in the mirror paper. I think that could kind of break the illusion if you can see something reflected like that. I considered maybe painting one moon on the ceiling, but really I don't think anyone's going to be looking up there, so I'm just going to focus all of my energy on the 3 moons that I know will be seen. Now I am going to hand paint these, and as I said, I am happy I did this in the end. I think it gives it a really nice, like, you know how they used to hand paint backgrounds in old movies? And then I do have a little bit of a background in theater set design, and I just love hand painted backgrounds. I think they're so beautiful. So I'm glad I got to do this, even if it did take a while to get through 3 different moons. I painted in each traced circle with a white base because this is going to help it pop out from the background. And then they did look like they were glowing a little bit in the movie reference, so I'm just taking some watered down white paint and doing a little glow circle around the outside. This largest moon is going to be the green moon that we see in the reference. It's nearly neon, so I'm glad I had a green paint that was close to what I was looking for. And as I was painting this, the moon did get slightly larger and larger as I kind of went outside of my boundary box because I needed to like smooth it back out and make it round again. And even then, it's not a perfect sphere, which not all of Saturn moons are spheres, as I learned. I learned a lot during this video. I'm very much making up the lights and shadows that are going on the moon, and if I could have done this in oil paint, I think it would have made it a lot easier because it's so much easier to blend oil paint because it stays wet for a lot longer. Acrylic paint dries so quickly that it makes it difficult to blend the colors together. So I just have to keep going back and forth and adding more green paint to make sure that there is wet green paint on the wall so it can blend together with the blue paint or the white paint or whatever paint I'm adding. I did pull out black acrylic paint to make the shadows, but I quickly realized that I didn't want to make shadows that were darker than the sky itself. So the darkest color you will see in the sky is the blue of the background that I previously painted. So all the shadows on all the moons, the darkest color is going to be this blue. I was very unsure about the dark shadow on this green moon until I started creating craters, which you can see in the original reference. I'm not copying it completely, but I'm just making some fun shapes in the moon to make it look like the shadows hitting it and really highlighting that there are craters and that maybe this moon has been through a lot. As I was working, I realized I had to do a lot of waiting to allow layers to dry because I was starting to scrape off wet paint when I didn't let it dry completely. This was a great test of patience for me because the paint would be too dry to blend, but it was too wet to continue forward without something scraping off, and it was just a lot of waiting. For the 2 moons on the opposite wall, I did one with an undercoating of yellow, which I do eventually change to orange, and then I made the smallest one a gray moon. And you can't see much of the painting process because my hand is in the way, but I do really enjoy painting the gray moon the most. I think it was the most natural and came out the best in my opinion. Although if someone is watching who is a painter or even someone who studies how the moon looks, you may have a different opinion, but my goodness, if you are a mural painter, my hat's off to you because this was hard. This was a tough project to get right and make it all look cohesive because there's different elements. You're trying to make it look right in the space. It's not easy. I started painting the yellow moon with the white highlight, and that's when I decided, okay, I think we're going to go orange with this one. I think it just looks better against the blue. And then of course I used the blue shadow, and then I wasn't sure how blue going into orange would go because blue and orange when they mix sometimes make like a really muddy color, but I do think it blended out really well. I did struggle with this one because I just wanted it to be a smooth sphere, no craters or anything along those lines, so I had to keep going over it and over it, and the orange paint, it just wasn't a very good quality paint, so it wasn't covering very well, and it was a bit of a struggle, but I think I'm happy with how it came out in the end. So here are my 3 moons. The light source would be on the left, so the sun is somewhere on the left of this space. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it came out. So I'm going to clean out the space, repaint the sand area, and let everything dry completely before I put back in the mirror room. And to do that little hand transition, it was a little precarious because my pug was sleeping right by the tripod, and she's not the most graceful of creatures I've ever met. And here's Stormy, thought you'd like to see the dogs. But she did stay put, and I got to do my little transition while I painted the sand floor, which I do think is a good idea because if I do have any thin spots in my sand coming up, it'll be great to have a yellow base. So here is the final look at my hand-painted background for the sandworm Saturn scene. And as promised, I put the mirror practice hallway back in place. This will be rebuilt with a more sturdy mirror, one that completely covers the side without having a seam down the middle. And I'm hoping it will be an even better illusion than it already is. I cannot wait to see the door just like floating there, with a hallway into the Maitland's house. The painting is done. I have proof that the mirror trick is going to work. So now I can move on with the rest of my design, which is going to be coming in future videos. There are several elements that are going into this space that have to cohabitate together, which would be the sandworms, the rock formations, and the sand. And then of course, if I'm making an entire, well, like a little tiny room behind the door, all of that has to go together in the right order at the right time to make sure that the scene works together. So that's why I wanted to make a planning video. I know a lot of you appreciate seeing the planning side of these projects because that is a big part of the miniature art form, is knowing what order to do things in and making sure you don't have to backtrack or pull something out because you put it in a little bit too early. So now I can research and order my mirror so I can have an actual mirror and not mirror paper. I think that will enhance the look of the room even more. I did order some yellow sand. This is all I have. I was hoping it would be a little bit more when I ordered it, but I'm thinking I'm going to mix it because this is very yellow. I'm going to mix it with some actual just sand, like the regular like tan colored sand. So it is a bit more yellow, but just a tiny bit subdued compared to this. And I think adding in some actual sand will give it a little bit more variety and texture than just the refined art sand that I purchased. I also ordered a new tub of my favorite lightweight spackling. This is how I've made any scene that has snow in it. And I'm gonna do the exact same process, but with sand, to make it look like sand dunes. So that will be happening in an upcoming video, but I'm very, very excited. And during this week, I have also been 3D printing some sandworms. I know there are probably a few of you who are hoping I would hand sculpt the sandworm, but I have already hand sculpted one sandworm, and that's not really something I ever want to do again. It was incredibly difficult. I will link the video down below if you want to see how I did it. But trying to get that, like sandworms, if you're not familiar, have like a little interior head and then an exterior head, and they have a ton of teeth and a tongue. Sculpting their neck is not that big of a deal, but the whole face is just incredibly intricate and difficult. So I reached out to a YouTuber that I previously collaborated with, Elise Little Things, and I asked her if she would maybe have time to take my original scan of my original sculpture of a sandworm and put it into 3D, clean it up, maybe put the sandworms in different poses. And I'm so thankful that she was able to use her amazing talent and her time in the middle of her busy schedule to help me with several different poses for the sandworms. So we're gonna have several sandworms. It's going to be very spooky. Thank you again to Elise. I will link her channel in the description box below, and then I will talk more about her channel in an upcoming video where I'm actually painting these guys. Thank you again for watching. This might have been a shorter video with not as many projects inside of it, but I appreciate you following along, and I look forward to many more videos in Beetlegust coming up as we complete the Saturn sandworm scene. That was aggressive. I hope you all have a very happy Beetlegust, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Did I lose a bat? I think I lost a couple bats. 1, 2, 3. Did they fly off when I opened the thing? Don't worry, I found them. They were only held on by electrical tape, so. The bats are back in town, the bats are back in town. Ooh. All right, got our bats back. That's enough bad luck for the day.